In 1905, the Whitmore family gathered for a seemingly ordinary family portrait. But what was captured on that photograph would hide a deadly secret for decades. Every smile, every glance, every subtle gesture in this image tells a story they never wanted revealed. Today, we uncover the shocking truth behind the photograph that froze a murder in time. Watch closely, because what you see may not be what really happened. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to uncover more dark mysteries. The Whitmore estate loomed through the early morning mist, its sprawling stone walls half shrouded by creeping ivy and shadowed by the tall oaks lining the driveway. A chill hung in the air, unusual for late spring, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The gravel crunched under the heavy boots of Edward Whitmore, patriarch of the family, as he strode toward the front door with a measured, authoritative pace. His polished coat and perfectly combed hair suggested a man meticulous in appearance, and in control of every detail in his household. Behind him, Margaret Whitmore, his wife, followed gracefully, her gloved hands folded tightly at her waist. She moved with an elegance that belied the subtle tension in her shoulders and the slight flicker of unease in her eyes. Today, she reminded herself, the photograph must be perfect. Any misstep, any hint of the scandal she had buried for years, could unravel everything. The cobblestone driveway echoed under the hooves of the carriage carrying Thomas, the eldest son, and Lillian, the daughter, who sat side by side, exchanging stiff pleasantries. Thomas's gaze kept darting toward the shadows at the edge of the estate grounds, where the fog seemed to cling unnaturally to the tree line. He felt watched, though by whom, he couldn't say. Lillian, meanwhile, was quietly observing everything. The way her father's knuckles whitened around the brass doorknob, the slight tremor in her mother's lips, awkward stiffness of her younger brother, Henry, who sat hunched in the corner of the carriage, reluctant to make eye contact with anyone. The carriage stopped. The driver opened the door with a ceremonious flourish, and the family stepped onto the gravel, their polished shoes clicking against the stones in a rhythm almost like a heartbeat. Henry lingered for a moment, glancing back at the carriage, his fingers curling nervously around the leather strap of his satchel. He felt an unexplainable dread, a silent warning that today was not like any other day. From the front steps, Edward surveyed his family. The estate, though majestic, seemed to watch them back its darkened windows, reflecting their nervous expressions. He gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, as if signaling a command known only to those bound by blood. Margaret adjusted the folds of her dress and inhaled sharply. "It must appear as if we are flawless," she whispered under her breath, almost to herself, almost to the house itself. As the family entered the parlor, the air grew heavier. A grand clock ticked in the corner, each second punctuating the silence. Outside, the morning mist thickened, swallowing the edges of the estate as if trying to hide the secrets buried within its walls. The Whitmores, unaware that their composure was about to be captured forever on film, moved into position, their faces rehearsed, their expressions carefully composed. Yet beneath the surface, subtle tremors of fear, resentment, and hidden guilt lingered silent, but undeniable. Little did they know, a single click of the shutter in the coming hours would freeze these gestures, these glances, and these secrets forever in a photograph. They would tell a story they were desperate to keep hidden. The parlor of the Whitmore estate was vast and imposing, with high ceilings, ornate moldings, and dark wooden furniture polished to a reflective sheen. Heavy drapes hung over tall windows, filtering the pale morning light into muted patterns on the worn rug. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow every movement, silent witnesses to generations of secrets and whispered scandals. Today, the living family would join that lineage, their own hidden truths poised to enter the historical record, whether they liked it or not. Edward Whitmore seated himself at the head of the long mahogany table, his posture rigid, hands clasped in front of him. His eyes scanned each family member, a calculating look that seemed to weigh their thoughts, their intentions, even their loyalty. Thomas fidgeted in his chair, avoiding eye contact, trying to mask a restless energy that threatened to betray him. The air was thick with unspoken tensions, each glance like a loaded gun waiting to go off. Margaret poured tea with deliberate care, the porcelain clinking softly as she moved. Her voice was calm, but her eyes darted toward Thomas, a subtle warning she had learned to convey through glances alone. "Thomas," she said smoothly, "try to remain composed today. We must make a good impression for the photographer." "I am composed," Thomas muttered, though the edge in his tone suggested otherwise. His fingers drummed against the table, betraying the storm of thoughts he fought to suppress. He remembered the argument from the night before, whispered threats exchanged in the shadowed corridors, a debt he could not repay, a secret he could not share. Lillian, sitting across from him, observed quietly, her sharp eyes noting every micro-expression. She had always been the family's silent observer, a student of human nature, even before she understood the weight of her own. She noticed Henry shrinking into himself, his gaze flicking nervously from one sibling to another. His hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly that the knuckles were white, his pale face betraying fear he had yet to articulate. The conversation was a polite facade de discussion of the estate's gardens, the upcoming social season, minor successes, and obligations. Yet beneath the words, tension crackled like static electricity. Each carefully chosen phrase hid layers of resentment and mistrust. Each smile carried the weight of unspoken threats. Edward's sharp gaze followed each movement, alert to any sign of weakness. Margaret's hands shook imperceptibly as she refilled her husband's teacup. A small tremor she forced into invisibility. The servants moved quietly in the background, setting the table with meticulous precision, their presence barely acknowledged. They sensed the undercurrent of unease, the kind that could snap unexpectedly, yet they dared not intervene. Even the air seemed charged, carrying a faint metallic tone, as if the house itself anticipated the storm that lurked behind the day's formality. Lillian finally broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "Mother, Father, do you remember the last portrait we took here? The one with Uncle Richard?" Her question was casual, but the way she emphasized the name caused Thomas to stiffen, his eyes narrowing. Margaret's hand paused mid-air, and Edward's jaw tightened. "Yes," Edward said finally, his tone clipped. "That was many years ago. It seems like a lifetime." There was a pause, long enough to feel the seconds stretch into tension. Each family member sensed the weight behind the words, something left unsaid, a story neither told nor forgotten. The grandfather clock chimed 11, its deep resonances vibrating through the polished floors. It was a reminder of the inevitable. The photograph would be taken soon, and within it, all their carefully concealed truths would be laid bare in a single, unforgiving frame. Lillian's eyes drifted toward the parlor window, where shadows of the surrounding trees danced on the floor. Something about the way the light fell made her uneasy, a subtle sense that the world outside was watching, waiting for the secrets inside to emerge. A sharp knock echoed through the parlor, startling the family from their polite conversation. The air, already heavy with tension, seemed thicken. Edward straightened immediately, his eyes narrowing as he addressed the sound. "That must be him," Margaret whispered, smoothing the folds of her dress. Her voice was calm, yet her fingers trembled slightly as she clasped them together. The butler opened the door to reveal a tall man in a black frock coat, carrying a polished wooden camera case and a tripod strapped across his shoulder. His eyes were piercing, almost unsettling, as if they could see past the surface into the secrets each person tried to hide. He bowed slightly, a formal gesture, yet it lacked warmth. "Good morning," the photographer said, his voice smooth and controlled, each word deliberate. I am Mr. Olcott. I will be taking your family portrait today. He set the camera case down with careful precision, his movements sharp but measured. A family, stiff and uneasy, offered polite nods and faint smiles. Thomas's fingers twitched under the table, his gaze flicking toward the camera, as if sensing it might expose more than just their faces. Henry shrank slightly in his chair, his palms sweaty, unsure whether to meet the photographer's penetrating stare. Lillian, as always, observed quietly, noticing the small details, the slight scar above the man's eyebrow, the meticulous way he adjusted the tripod, the cold gleam in his eyes as he scanned the room. Edward's voice cut through the room, authoritative and firm. We expect nothing less than perfection today. Mr. Olcott, our family's reputation is to be represented accurately and respectfully. Of course, sir, Olcott replied without hesitation. But there was a subtle undercurrent in his tone, something unspoken, a faint hint that he knew more than he let on. He set the tripod carefully, adjusting the lens, aligning it with the light, filtering through the tall parlor windows. Margaret followed him with her eyes, uneasy. "Is the lighting suitable?" she asked. Her voice held a forced cheerfulness, but her knuckles whitened on the edge of her fan. "The light is adequate," Olcott said, almost cryptically. "But it is not merely light that captures a portrait, madam. One must also capture the truth behind appearances." His words lingered in the air, a subtle sting that seemed to press upon every family member. Thomas shifted in his seat, unease rising in his chest. Truth behind appearances? He muttered under his breath, barely audible. Lillian's eyes caught his movement, noting the tension coiling in his body. Even Henry seemed to flinch at the words. Olcott began to unpack the camera, each movement deliberate, almost ritualistic. The tripod's legs extended with mechanical precision, the lens gleaming under the muted sunlight. He surveyed the family once more, a faint, unreadable smile playing at his lips. "Now, if everyone will take their positions," he said, gesturing toward the center of the parlor, "we shall capture a moment in time. A moment that, I assure you, will tell a story for generations." The statement hung in the air, weighty and deliberate, as though it carried a warning. The Whitmores exchanged uneasy glances, each silently questioning whether this photograph would be just another keepsake or something far more revealing. Outside, the mist thickened, curling around the estate like a living shroud, as if the world itself anticipated the secrets about to be captured within the lens. The parlor fell into an uneasy silence as Mr. Olcott adjusted the camera on its tripod. The polished lens caught the dim morning light, glinting almost like an eye, observing, judging. He stepped back and raised a hand, motioning for the family to position themselves. Edward Whitmore, standing tall, moved to the center of the room, his posture rigid, shoulders squared, eyes scanning each family member. "Thomas, stand next to me," he instructed, voice low but commanding. Thomas complied reluctantly, his expression taut, jaw clenched, eyes flicking nervously toward the shadows in the corner. Lillian and Henry followed, careful to place themselves exactly where their mother directed. Margaret, the matriarch, stepped gracefully to the side, her hands folded in front of her, the folds of her dress arranged just so. Her eyes, however, betrayed a subtle tension. Every glance, every twitch of a finger or flick of the wrist seemed rehearsed, but only she knew how fragile the performance truly was. "Hold still," Olcott instructed, his voice calm, almost hypnotic. "This will take patience, and patience will reveal more than mere faces." His words carried a weight the family felt, but did not dare address. As the family moved into place, subtle gestures began to surface, small tells that might have gone unnoticed by any other observer. Thomas's hand curled slightly behind his back, as if concealing an object. Edward's gaze lingered on the youngest son, noting every twitch of Henry's fingers. Margaret's eyes flicked repeatedly toward the doorway, measuring the distance, calculating the possibility of interference. And Lillian, quiet and observant, noticed the tiniest inconsistencies, the tilt of a head, a foot positioned just so, the faintest shadow on the rug that didn't match the light. The photographer adjusted the camera's lens, kneeling slightly to ensure the framing was perfect. "Let us begin with the first pose," he said. He moved with precise efficiency, gesturing silently with his hands. "Notice your hands, your expressions. The story of a family is written not in words, but in the subtleties of posture, in the direction of a gaze, in what is left unseen." Edward shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Ensure we are dignified, Mr. Alcott. Nothing must compromise our reputation." Alcott nodded, almost as if he understood the layers beneath that statement better than Edward himself. He adjusted the lens again and stepped back, observing the tableau like a conductor assessing an orchestra before a symphony. Margaret's attention flicked to Thomas. "Remember, composure is essential," she reminded him in a whisper that only he could hear. Thomas's jaw tightened, and he subtly shifted his stance, but the slightest tremor betrayed the tension coiling within him. Henry tried to imitate his older sister's calm, but his body was rigid, knuckles white around the edge of his seat. He glanced at the corner of the room where shadows pooled unnaturally, the mist from outside curling near the windowpane. Something about it made his heart pound faster, though he couldn't explain why. Lillian's gaze, sharp and analytical, caught everything the unsteady foot of Thomas, the tiny tremor in Margaret's fingers, the faint crease of worry etched into Edward's brow. She realized that when the shutter clicked, these silent confessions, these minute details, would be captured forever in an image that none of them could deny. "Very good," Alcott finally said, lifting the camera slightly. "Now take a deep breath. Hold yourselves. Remember, even a single glance can reveal what words cannot." A hush fell over the room. The grand clock ticked steadily, each second amplifying the anticipation. The family held their positions, unaware that the smallest motions, the faintest gestures, the unspoken secrets hidden in body language, would soon be frozen forever on film forever capturing a story they had hoped would remain concealed. The room was silent, save for the faint tick of the grandfather clock and the soft shuffle of Mr. Alcott adjusting the camera. The lens gleamed like a polished eye, reflecting the tension in the parlor. Every breath seemed amplified, every subtle movement magnified in the hushed space. "Hold still," Alcott instructed, lifting the camera slightly. His voice was calm, almost hypnotic, but carried an unspoken weight, as if promising that nothing would remain hidden under his lens. The family complied, faces composed, hands positioned as carefully as the folds of their garments. Yet beneath the surface, the storm of hidden truths raged. Edward's posture was perfect, his expression stern and unwavering. Yet a slight twitch at the corner of his eye betrayed his growing unease. His gaze flicked toward Thomas, noting the faint tension in his eldest son's hands, fingers curling subtly behind his back. Thomas's jaw clenched, and he swallowed hard, aware that the lens could capture even the most fleeting gesture. A slip of truth he could not afford to reveal. Margaret, standing just to the side, exuded an almost imperceptible nervous energy. Her gloved hands rested delicately in front of her, but the faint tremor of her wrist betrayed a secret she had guarded for years. Her eyes darted briefly toward the window, where shadows pooled near the edge of the drapes, as if the world outside was intruding on this carefully controlled tableau. Lillian's eyes roamed, alert, taking in every detail. The tilt of a head, the slight lean of a shoulder, the subtle distance between Thomas and Edward, it was all a language of hidden motives. She noticed Henry's fingers tightening around the edge of his chair, a silent confession of fear that only the photograph could eternally capture. Alcott lowered himself slightly, adjusting the lens to frame the family perfectly. "Now," he said, voice soft but commanding, "this is the moment. Let the camera record not only appearances, but the truth beneath them." He clicked the shutter once. A faint mechanical whir followed, and in that instant, the air seemed to thrum with the weight of hidden stories. Each subtle glance, each restrained gesture, was frozen, immortalized. The photograph would hold secrets that words could not convey, the tension between father and son, the quiet fear of the youngest, the matriarch's silent anxiety. Another click. Alcott moved slightly, urging a subtle shift in posture. "Hold that position. Good. Breathe naturally." The instructions sounded simple, but in truth, every movement could betray the secrets the Whitmores were desperate to keep buried. Thomas's hand, previously hidden, now pressed lightly to the side of his coat. Lillian's eyes widened ever so slightly, she had noticed. The photograph, she realized, would reveal more than the family intended. Even the smallest gestures, the barely there frown on Edward's lips, Margaret's shifting weight, Henry's avoidance of the lens would speak volumes when studied. Click, click. The camera recorded multiple frames, each a snapshot of the same scene, yet each subtly different, like fragments of a story whispered in shadows. Alcott observed with a faint, knowing smile, as if he alone understood the full weight of what had just been captured. Finally, he lowered the camera and nodded. "That will suffice. You may relax." The family exhaled collectively, though the tension in the room remained palpable, unbroken. They had survived the photograph, yet Lillian knew it had captured far more than a family's composure. It had caught the silent, deadly truths lurking just beneath the surface dot outside. The mist pressed against the windows, curling like fingers trying to reach inside. The Whitmores were unaware that in the coming days, a single glance at this photograph would begin to unravel the carefully constructed facade, revealing a secret some would do anything to keep buried. The camera was packed away with meticulous precision, its polished parts glinting faintly in the dim light as Mr. Alcott moved with quiet efficiency. The family lingered in the parlor, each member pretending the formal ritual had not left its invisible mark upon them. The air, thick with lingering anticipation, was almost suffocating. Edward Whitmore broke the silence first, clearing his throat with deliberate authority. "Well, that is done. I trust everyone maintained proper decorum?" His gaze swept the room like a hawk, piercing the composed facades of his children and wife. Each subtle twitch, each small shiver, each sideways glance seemed amplified under his scrutiny. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his father's gaze. He muttered something inaudible, and Henry flinched, half startled. Lillian's eyes, ever observant, noticed the fleeting exchange, filing it away in her mind as part of the silent language of tension that the photograph had already begun to codify. Margaret stepped closer to the hearth, her hands resting lightly on the polished mantel. "Everything appears satisfactory," she said softly, though her voice lacked conviction. Her eyes darted toward the shadows in the corners of the room, as if expecting some unseen observer to comment on their performance. She exhaled slowly, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed that relief had not arrived. The servants moved quietly in the background, clearing teacups and straightening cushions, their presence almost ceremonial. They knew better than to speak, sensing that the atmosphere was fragile, a precarious balance between composure and chaos. Even the house itself seemed to hold its breath, the tall windows reflecting the subtle tremors in the family's expressions. Lillian took a tentative step forward, glancing at the recently emptied space where the camera had stood. Do you think it turned out well?" she asked carefully, testing the waters. Her tone was polite, almost innocent, but her sharp eyes flicked between Thomas and Edward, searching for the hints of unease she already suspected. Thomas's jaw tightened, and he shifted his stance. "It's just a photograph," he said, though his voice wavered ever so slightly. "Nothing more. But Lillian noticed the slight tremor in his fingers. The tension coiled beneath his words. Henry, pale and withdrawn, sank into a chair near the window, eyes fixed on the mist curling outside. He felt exposed, as though the act of being photographed had laid bare the hidden currents of fear and guilt he could never articulate. His silence spoke louder than any words he might have uttered. Even Margaret's composure faltered for a fraction of a moment, her eyes narrowing as though sensing something in the photograph had already begun to whisper truths they could not control. She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breath, but the faint sheen of sweat betrayed the anxiety lurking beneath her calm exterior. Edward finally exhaled, a slow, controlled release, and turned his attention to the windows. The day continues. Ensure everything is as it should be. Yet even as he spoke, a subtle unease lingered. The family had survived the photograph, but the photograph itself had survived them, capturing not only their appearance, but the silent, deadly tensions that none of them could hide. Outside, the mist pressed closer against the glass, curling like a silent witness. The Whitmores remained unaware that a single glance at that image would, in time, unravel the carefully constructed facade of their lives, revealing secrets that could no longer be contained. Days had passed since the photograph had been taken. The Whitmore family went about their routines, maintaining the polished appearances expected of them, yet a subtle tension had begun to creep into their movements. Edward busied himself with ledgers and estate matters, Margaret with her delicate embroidery, Thomas with errands he claimed were pressing, and Henry retreated further into the shadows of the house. Only Lillian seemed unaffected outwardly, her calm composure masking the storm of curiosity growing inside her. That evening, she retrieved the photograph from the photographer's envelope. The image, black and white with faint sepia tones, seemed ordinary at first glance. The family stood stiff and formal, faces rehearsed, eyes forward, hands in carefully arranged positions. Yet Lillian had learned to read the silent language of gestures, the micro-expressions that betrayed truths others thought hidden. Her gaze swept slowly over each figure. Edward stood perfectly composed, yet the tightness in his jaw and the subtle curl of his hand suggested tension beyond the frame. Margaret's delicate hands, though clasped, betrayed a slight tremor, and her eyes flicked not toward the camera, but toward something or someone outside the frame. Thomas's hand, previously hidden in the parlor, now seemed to press against the seam of his coat in a way that hinted at concealment. It was Henry who drew Lillian's attention most sharply. His timid posture in the photograph mirrored the fear she had always observed in him, the avoidance of eye contact, the slight curl inward of his shoulders, as though he were trying to make himself disappear entirely. And then, almost imperceptibly, she noticed the faint shadow behind him, something that had not been noticed at the time, partially obscured by the drapery. It was subtle, yet unmistakable, a figure positioned just out of immediate view, looming, patient, and deliberate. Lillian's heart quickened. She leaned closer, her finger tracing the contours of the shadow in the photograph. A sense of dread curled in her stomach. That figure, hidden in plain sight, could only be one of two possibilities: someone present during the photograph whose presence was deliberately concealed, or a silent witness to something darker, something that had been carefully orchestrated. She studied Thomas again. The set of his shoulders, the tension in his fingers, the flicker of fear in his eyes. It was all deliberate, yet involuntary. Lillian realized that the photograph had captured not only posture, but intent. It had immortalized the hidden interactions between family members, the small betrayals, the secret communications, the quiet confessions that went unnoticed in daily life. Margaret's expression froze in time as well. The photograph captured a micro-moment of fleeting glance at Edward, a silent warning, a reflection of guilt she could not suppress. Lillian felt a chill, recognizing the delicate dance of secrecy that had endured for years, now laid bare in black and white. And then, most chillingly, Lillian noticed something else. Thomas's hand near his coat, slightly clenched. She recalled the subtle movements in the parlor, the way he had shifted nervously, as if hiding a small object. Her breath caught. Could it be that the photograph had preserved evidence of a crime, a threat, a deadly secret that had never been confessed? For the first time, Lillian realized the full weight of the image before her. The photograph was more than a portrait. It was a silent witness, immortalizing every hidden truth, every unspoken fear, every carefully concealed act of deception. The photograph held a story the Whitmores had hoped would remain buried, a story that could unravel their carefully constructed facade if anyone dared to look too closely. Room seemed to grow colder as she sat in silence, tracing the lines of the image with her eyes. The shadows at the edge of the frame whispered secrets she had never imagined. She felt a shiver run down her spine. What had been hidden in the photograph was not just an ordinary secret. It was deadly, capable of destroying reputations, exposing betrayal, and possibly revealing a crime dot. As she leaned back in her chair, Lillian's resolve hardened. She would uncover the truth behind the photograph, piece together the hidden interactions, and reveal the deadly secret lurking in the shadows. Yet, even as determination filled her, she could not shake the feeling that the photograph had already set events into motion, that the silent witness it captured would not allow the secret to remain buried for long. Outside, the mist clung to the estate, curling around the windows like a living shroud, as if the house itself were aware of what had been discovered. The Whitmores, unaware of the scrutiny now being applied to their frozen expressions, carried on with their routines. But the photograph, silent, unforgiving, revealing, had already begun its work. The Whitmore estate had grown unnervingly quiet. The house, usually bustling with the subtle noises of servants and distant animals, felt heavy, almost suffocating, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the tension captured in the photograph days earlier. Lillian had kept the image close, examining it again and again, tracing the shadows, the gestures, the subtle signs of deception. She could no longer ignore the patterns. It was a story waiting to be exposed. She entered the parlor, where the rest of the family gathered under the pretense of a casual evening. Edward, as usual, was seated at the head of the mahogany table, his posture rigid, eyes scanning for control and obedience. Margaret sat gracefully beside him, her hands clasped, her face the perfect mask of composure. Thomas leaned against the fireplace, fingers twitching as though restrained by invisible chains. Henry remained at the edge of the room, pale and quiet, avoiding direct eye contact with anyone. Lillian cleared her throat, the sound unusually loud in the thick silence. I need to speak about the photograph," she began, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of tension. The room froze. Every eye shifted toward her. Edward's brow furrowed, and Margaret's delicate lips pressed together, signaling restraint. "What about it?" Edward asked, the sharp edge in his voice revealing the first cracks in his otherwise iron control. It shows more than just a family portrait," Lillian said carefully, placing the photograph on the table. She set it upright, ensuring it faced them all. "Every gesture, every glance, every shadow, it tells a story you've tried to hide. And I can see it. I can see the secret." A tense silence followed, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock. Thomas's eyes darted to the photograph, then to Lillian, then back again. "Lillian, this is nonsense," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The tremor in his fingers betrayed the lie he tried to force. Margaret's gloved hands tightened around the edge of the table. "What are you implying?" she asked, her tone calm but deadly. "I'm implying," Lillian continued, her gaze sharp and unwavering, "that someone in this room knows exactly what happened just before this photograph was taken. That there is a secret, deadly enough that it has been hidden all these years. captured in a single frame, waiting to be noticed. Edward's face darkened. "This is absurd," he said, standing abruptly. "There are no secrets here that concern anyone outside this family. We are above scandal." "Above scandal?" Lillian echoed, stepping closer. "Or above the truth. The photograph doesn't lie. Thomas, your hand. What are you hiding?" Her eyes locked on his, cutting through his rehearsed composure. Thomas's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Margaret's face went pale. The perfect mask cracked. Even Henry looked up, his fear now mingled with a flicker of recognition, as if the photograph had revealed something he had long suspected but never spoken. Alcott's words from the day of the shoot echoed in Lillian's mind. One must also capture the truth behind appearances. The photograph had captured the unspoken, the hidden hand, the tension, the guilt. "You were the one who did it," Lillian said softly, her voice almost trembling with the weight of revelation. The room seemed to constrict around them, each family member's breath audible in the tense air. Thomas's shoulders slumped, the fight drained from him. "It was an accident," he confessed, voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for anyone to find out. I didn't know how to stop it." Margaret gasped, the sound sharp, involuntary. Edward's hand shot out, slamming onto the table. "Accident? You dare speak of an accident in this house?" His face was red with rage, but his eyes carried the first flickers of fear, not for the reputation, but for exposure. Henry's voice broke the silence, soft and hesitant. I saw it," he admitted, trembling. "I wanted to tell, but I was afraid." The room's tension reached a breaking point. Margaret moved toward Thomas, her eyes wide, a mix of horror and disbelief. "All these years," she whispered. "All these years, and no one knew." Lillian stepped back, her eyes sweeping over the family. The photograph lay between them, silent but unyielding a witness to the crime, immortalizing every flicker of guilt, fear, and betrayal. Each expression frozen in time told the story they had tried so desperately to bury. Edward slumped into his chair, his control slipping as the full weight of the revelation settled upon him. The household that had prided itself on dignity and composure now trembled under the truth that could no longer be hidden. Shadows from the corners of the room seemed to stretch closer, as if the house itself recognized the culmination of secrets long held. Lillian knew the confrontation was only the beginning. The photograph would forever bear witness, and the deadly truth it captured could not be erased. For the first time, the Whitmores faced each other without pretense. The carefully constructed facade was gone, replaced by raw, unflinching reality. And in the center of it all, the photograph remained, immortalizing their secrets in black and white, a silent, unforgiving testament to what had transpired. The parlor was quiet once more, the echoes of confrontation still hanging in the heavy air. The Whitmore family sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts, the weight of unspoken reflections pressing upon them. The photograph rested on the table, upright and unyielding, a black and white testament to the truth that had finally been revealed. Every shadow, every posture, every glance was now a frozen confession, impossible to deny. Edward remained slumped in his chair, staring at the photograph with a mixture of rage and resignation. For years, he had controlled the family with an iron hand, enforcing decorum and hiding indiscretions, but the lens had caught him unguarded. The perfect image of authority he had crafted was shattered, replaced with an undeniable glimpse of tension and fear that he could not erase. Margaret's hands were folded tightly in her lap, her face pale but composed. Her eyes flicked once more to the photograph, tracing the subtle tremors and fleeting glances captured within. Though the truth had been revealed, she knew the power of appearances remained. To the outside world, the family would continue its facade, but only Lillian and those who had dared to see the photograph's secrets knew the reality that lay beneath. Thomas stood silently near the fireplace, shoulders slumped, guilt etched into every line of his body. His confession had lifted the burden of secrecy, but it had also exposed him to judgment and scrutiny he could never escape. Henry, still pale, lingered at the edge of the room, quieter now, a sense of both relief and fear in his eyes. He had witnessed the unraveling, and though the secret was no longer hidden, its weight still pressed upon his shoulders. Lillian moved to the photograph and gently adjusted its angle, ensuring it faced the room as if to observe them all once more. She traced the outline of each figure, reflecting on the delicate balance of truth and deception, of appearances and reality. The image had captured more than a family. It had captured the very essence of their hidden fears, their subtle betrayals, and the quiet consequences of secrecy. Outside, the mist clung to the Whitmore estate, curling along the edges of the windows and shrouding the grounds in a ghostly haze. The house seemed to exhale, as though acknowledging that the secrets it had harbored were now laid bare, yet understanding that some truths would linger beyond words, beyond confessions, beyond time. The family, now aware of the photograph's power, moved through the remainder of the day in cautious silence. Polite interactions resumed, but every gesture, every glance, carried the weight of remembrance. The photograph had altered the dynamic forever, embedding in each of them a knowledge that could not be undone. As the evening light faded, Lillian took one last look at the image. A faint shiver ran down her spine, not of fear, but of understanding. The photograph would remain, framed on the parlor wall, a silent sentinel of truth. It would bear witness long after the Whitmores were gone, ensuring that the secrets captured in that single moment of 1905 would never be forgotten. The shadows of the estate deepened, the mist thickened, and the house settled into quiet stillness. The photograph, eternal and unyielding, watched over them all, a deadly secret immortalized, yet forever silent, waiting for the next observer brave enough to read the story hidden in its shadows.